We'll go ahead and get started. So welcome again to the Rural Library Network Conversations for Action. My name is Regina Washington, Director of Rural Impact Networks and Managing Director of Rural Library Network. Rural Library Network was born out of a joint effort by Partners for Rural Impact, committed to accelerating educational outcomes in rural places from cradle to career, and Save the Children, who is committed to give children a healthy start in life, the opportunity to learn and protection from harm. The mission is that all rural students succeed. And to be a little bit more clear, there's quite a few associations and organizations out there that provide support for rural libraries. The Rural Library Network is a forum to engage and support rural libraries and practitioners committed to moving that cradle to career outcome needle for youth aged 0 to 24, especially in rural places across this nation. We also build community and shared learning among members committed to not only improving cradle to career outcomes, but also strengthening place-based community partnerships across educational institutions, among public, academic, and school libraries, to name a few. We're also here to drive funding and resources to members committed to advancing educational outcomes across that cradle to career, such as kindergarten readiness, reading proficiency, high school graduation and college readiness, college graduation, and meaningful employment. And this at a glance gives you an idea of our membership here. The Rural Library Network has a membership of 925 library practitioners and friends of library committed to moving those needles, moving the needle for cradle to career outcomes in rural America. We have a monthly webinar, Conversations for Action, which covers a wide range of topics, including family engagement, early childhood learning, diversity, equity, and inclusion topics, also grant writing strategies. And we also focus some of the webinars on funding opportunities, such as funding for summer reading and feeding programs, arts and humanities, and also topics such as health integration. Annually, the Rural Library Network brings together more than 300 library practitioners and friends of the libraries. How many of you all out there have joined us for the E-Summit in December? We just wrapped that up last year. And we actually, this is a forum to share models of partnerships to advance educational outcomes, learn new approaches to create safe and healthy and supported learning environments, and then also drive resources to libraries and practitioners as we increase the opportunity for networking. And so today, we're really glad that you're here with us as we're kicking off actually Black History Month. We're also kicking off our series this year for the Rural Library Network Conversations for Action webinars of the year, titled Tools to Talk About Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility, DEIA. The Colorado Rural Education Collaborative and Generation School Network and the Public Education and Business Coalition are offering a chance for educators, leaders, librarians to expand their diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility skills. And this particular webinar will provide tools for administrators to identify the right entry points, having done your own work to better understand the issues in the system. We hope that this will complement the work that you actually are doing currently. And at the end, we're excited to provide announcements on grant opportunities, especially American Heart Association that's now carved out about $10,000 for our network members to engage in projects for those libraries across the Midwest. And let me take a moment to introduce our speakers. First, I'd like to introduce Kirk Banghart, Vice President and Chief Facilitator of the Colorado Rural Education Collaborative. Um, Kirk serves, as the Vice President and Chief Facilitator of the Colorado Education Collaborative, and really brings a wealth of experience to this network through his extensive background in rural education. He has over 20 years in rural education, years of experience in rural education. He served as a certified superintendent, assistant superintendent, principal, teacher, and coach. He is a trained auditor in the Phi Delta Kappa curriculum program, which ensures curriculum alignment at all levels of schools, and has led 2 national Title I School of Distinction recipient schools. In addition, Kirk has ensured the high success rates of schools around him by planning and facilitating a 14-district inclusive professional learning community focused on modernizing curriculum and assessment. As chief facilitator of the Colorado Rural Education Collaborative, he seeks to raise a voice, and he serves as a voice and architect of the statewide multi-district effort that is innovating to solve rural Colorado's most pressing rural education challenges, with the goal of bringing prosperity and opportunity to rural students, teachers, librarians, and leaders. And so he's also joined by Katie. Katie is actually also working with Kirk as a director for the network, and supports initiative across all areas of the work. In these roles, she manages complex projects, ensures outcomes are met that improve school districts and advance student achievement through deeper learning. She has helped create curricular units for use of this network's advocacy program, conducts assessments of schools' use of time and space, and advises on instructional best practices. Previously, she worked as a high school English teacher and administrator for a community school in Cincinnati, Ohio. So shout out to all the Ohio folks that are joining us today for 6 years. Katie brings extensive experience in teacher coaching and development, holistic school improvement, and building relevant and innovative programs for students into her role at the network. Katie has also worked as an expeditionary learning trip leader for Bold Earth in Golden, Colorado, during which time she gained skills in alternative teaching and learning styles that benefit the students in extensive learning opportunities. I am so glad that they have actually joined us for our kickoff of our Conversations for Action. You know, again, I know aside from the cold, blistering weather that Colorado is having now, but you know, we're so glad that you've been able to join us today. And please take it away, Katie and Kirk. Thank you.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Kirk.
Well, thank you all. We're very excited to be here today to talk about some of the work that we've been doing in Colorado and across the country, especially around this area of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility when it comes to organizations that really serve students. And so I think part of what we're going to talk about today is really around our theory of change that we've used within schools, and we believe that it works for all institutions. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. One of the things that I always like to do is put out right on the table. Some people see the screen and say, hey, that's a white middle class guy. How is he qualified to have this conversation? And part of what we'd like to talk about with folks is that we're all on that journey. And so part of the work that we've done individually as well as organizations is to work on going down that journey and seeing the place. We also know that a lot of our institutions, schools and libraries, are really dominated by white middle class leaders. And so one of the things that we've found in our work is that being able to empathize and describe our journey that we've gone through really helps leaders in those spaces be able to embrace what sometimes is a very challenging topic and sometimes can put people on the defensive in how they need to make changes within themselves and their organizations. So we approach it as there's lots of different entry points for all people within our boards, within our organizations, as leaders, and we bring that to the table to have that conversation to do that. I think Regina did a great job on introduction, so I don't know if I have anything more to add with that. Katie, anything you would like to add?
Nope. Just in addition to what Kirk says, we acknowledge that we don't represent traditionally underserved communities. We're here to be proud allies and are on our own learning journey as well. So here to share the information that we do know with everyone. Today's presentation, we're hoping to make it as interactive as possible. So we're going to ask folks there's going to be some breakout groups and some opportunities for you all to reflect. I've provided note catchers and various types of activities for us to all be here together. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. I also just want to thank Regina as well for that excellent introduction. She and I met at the National Rural Forum this past October in Green Bay, Wisconsin, talked about frigid temperatures. It was already pretty cold in October. And so we were found ourselves to be like-minded right away. So happy to continue that connection with you all here. This training that we are going to kind of review with everybody today has been developed with money from the Colorado Health Foundation. It's a 4-part series that has been developed for mostly rural leaders, but also adapted for various audiences as well. We like to say that the 4-part series are four in-person days with an overview session. So the overview that we're going to go through today is kind of an overview of what those 4 sessions are. As well. So on the screen here, the purpose of our trainings that we're going to do with folks are to provide the lens for diving into DEIA to reduce barriers to student and community prosperity. We know that libraries, just like schools, are often a hub of their communities, a place where people come to learn, tutor, connect with each other, all sorts of things. I'm very passionate about my local library as well. So want to focus on the library's responsibility to reduce barriers for other stakeholders as well. We're hoping that through our training, participants will understand how culture and experience shape their privilege, as well as frame possible solutions to addressing barriers to DEIA within their systems. Just a little bit about us. I won't go into a lot of detail here. I want to focus on the meat of the presentation, but GSN and CREC, you'll see our 2 logos here, are partner organizations. CREC is the one that's specifically focused on rural education. And we are Generation Schools, as the umbrella organization, is focused on the research of the whole student approach that is critical to high school completion. And our mission and vision, which I'll focus on here, I'll focus on the vision piece that ensures every student thrives in school, work, and life. So all of our work revolves around that every student, all student emphasis. So we're here to make sure that all of our kiddos are getting the support that they need.
So one of the things we want to do, and we appreciate everyone jumping in the chat. One of the things that we really start with focusing on is thinking about how we all have different identity markers that we bring to the table. And so the illustration there hopefully helps you think about the different identity markers that you hold. And so one of the things that we'd ask you to do is in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, again, putting your name, your organization, where you're from, your position with that organization, and also if you feel willing or safe to share one of the identity markers that you identify with on our wheel that we put. So we'll give everybody just a second in the chat, if you wouldn't mind throwing that in there.
And so also one of the things we'd like to do here, of course, we're all pretty used to Zoom, but we've also done this training several times in person. So what we typically do here is like to get voices in the room as well. So if anybody would like to just go off mute and be a voice in the room to tell us a little bit about yourself and one of your identity markers, we'd like to open the floor to offer that up as well.
Well, as everyone's continuing to do that, one of the things that we find in our work, and part of where this wheel really comes in handy when working with staffs, is that a lot of times, especially depending on what optics someone is bringing to the conversation, a lot of times identity markers can be very narrowed by individuals. So they may only choose one of those that they see. So age, for example, I'm a younger staff member, I'm an older staff member, communities. And so one of the things that we try to bring forward is to help folks realize that we all bring a wide array of identity markers to a conversation and to an organization. So the wheel has helped us in a lot of times be able to help people kind of broaden their perspective and not just bring that single identity that they're bringing to the table to do that. And so thank you all who jumped in and put yours in. It looks like we've got a wonderful diversity across the country of folks who are here today. And so we appreciate it. We would ask if we could get a volunteer that someone's willing to share their organization, where they're from, and that if you would, the identity marker you chose to bring forward. So we'll ask you, if we could ask 4 or 5 to come forward, go ahead and come off of mute and do that. I always tell people I was an ex-middle school teacher, so I'm really good with wait time. So I'll torment you with wait time if I don't get people to come off. But it looks like I've already got Lori putting her hand up. So Lori, if you want to jump in, that's great.
Can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I was always that kid that would raise their hand, pick me, pick me. But I'm Lori Special, I'm Director of Library Development at the State Library of Colorado. And my attributes, or whatever they're called right now, are she, her. I'm a Black Bahamian American, first generation, Anglican Episcopalian, cis hetero. I'm a PhD student now, and I'm a mid-career manager, not a real librarian anymore.
All right. Well, thank you, Lori. Appreciate it. Someone else who'd like to come out and mute and share. I see Allison. Would you mind?
Hi, my name is Allison. I am from rural Michigan, work for White Pine Library Cooperative. I am the office manager. I use she, her pronouns, identify somewhere as gender queer and being queer in general. And I was raised English speaking, and I'm a white woman, very obviously.
Great, thank you. Another volunteer.
Looks like we got
Emily,
Emily.
I see a hand raised.
Hi, I'm Emily Sedgwick. I'm a content specialist and librarian. The lady who just said she was a former librarian or not a librarian anymore. Yes, we are. We're still librarians. I work at the National Center for Families Learning. I am privileged by my ability to speak English in an English speaking society. I'm a female. I'm straight. I am past middle age, so that may be not a privilege. I don't know. And I'm well educated. So those are my privileges.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Appreciate everyone who jumped in and talked it. I very much agree with Emily's statement. I think librarians, much like teachers, it is a badge that you never get to remove. You always are, because of the love and what got us into our profession. So very much agree with you. The next thing that we'd like to do is perfect. We're going to actually drop us into breakout rooms and talk a little bit. We put a quote up, and Katie, you want to talk more about this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So in doing research about why this topic was especially important to our libraries, I found this article, and the link to the article is going to be made available for you if you'd like to read it in full. So I very rarely read the slide, but when it's a quote, I like to do that. So to live up to their mission, public libraries must recognize why systemic racism persists and work intentionally to eliminate discriminatory policies and practices. It isn't enough to not be racist. Leaders must be actively and intentionally anti-racist by confronting racism wherever they find it, including in themselves. One thing I'd like to call out in this quote is policies and practices. So you're going to hear us talk about that quite a bit in our sessions, in our 4 different workshops that we're going to talk about. But as Kirk mentioned, I'm going to open up you guys into breakout groups. These are going to be pretty short, just about 5 minutes long. And in these breakout groups, I'm going to ask you guys to just simply reflect upon this quote and what resonated with you within the group that you're going to be broken out into. Elsa has put a document in the chat. This is an open on the web Google Doc. You're going to see different activities. We're going to focus on breakout 1. So I just put them all in one doc for ease of technology. So try not to jump ahead to our future activities when you see them on the document. So the first one that you'll see is just this quote pasted in there for you so that when you go into your breakout groups, you have the ability to reread it and discuss it. So again, 5-minute breakout groups, which I'm going to pop you into and just discuss what this quote resonates with you with the group that you're in. Any questions for the good of the whole before I open up the rooms? Okay, and I'll give you all a warning about 1 minute when the rooms are closing. Okay, so for folks that are still in this main room, you may have to hit the join room button, or we could just have a conversation here in the main room as well, if that's more convenient. It also could be that these folks are like listening, but not with us. So I'm not sure, Regina or Chelsea, should we like try to find out, or Elsa too, or should we try to find out if these folks want to join a breakout group or? Okay. Everybody here has been assigned, so you may have to hit the join button.
There's a couple people in the chat that said.
Okay, thank you. That was one thing I forgot to mention in our precursor call was I was not looking at the chat.
Yep. So they just.
Okay, so just listening. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
you know, Katie, I don't know if you want to just kind of entertain that here in this space, or you can also maybe segue them into a particular breakout room.
Yeah, I've already tried that. I think that it's like either their connection is bad or they are just here to listen. So if anybody is in this main room that wants to share a thought, that's what we're ready for. Or I don't know if Kirk or Regina, you want to go into a different room and listen and have me.
Yeah, I think
monitor
I'll
here?
jump into a room and do that.
Okay.
I know Katie, time wise, will just want to gauge
Yeah.
shortening.
Yeah,
some
it's
of
gonna
the
go
questions.
fast. It's gonna go fast. You should have the ability, Kirk. You should have a button to have you join room 2.
Okay, and I can go into a room as well.
Okay. And Regina, I had put you in room 4, so you should have that button somewhere on your
Okay.
screen. Yeah.
Great.
So for those of us that are in here, are we
Mhm.
thinking then maybe about particular barriers in general, since it's not sort of divvied up, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, so all we're talking about right now is just responding to this quote that kind of was on the screen as a way to frame the conversation. So we're not into specific barriers yet. So just if you have any thoughts or reactions to the quote that I offered on the screen.
Okay.
And the rooms are gonna close actually like in 1 minute. So
So we're going to talk about it anyway.
Yeah. sorry, I'm doing breakout groups, slides, chat. Trying to keep the time.
It is. It's a lot going
Yeah,
on.
it's a lot.
And people are still joining, so that's good.
Yeah.
Getting a few folks.
You're doing fantastic, by the way.
Okay, great.
So Brenda had a thought in the chat, and she had said, I jumped in feet first to confronting racism in our institutional past when I became a branch manager, but have found that it has been an interesting journey being likewise confronted by a largely white male town council who do not like change. So I think that's what's bringing up. The quote's bringing that up.
And I just closed the room, so I will offer opportunity for share out too.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I apologize for the forcible removal from your Zoom room. I know that's always extremely unsatisfying. I'm sure everybody was in the middle of a brilliant conversation that I've interrupted. So we'll try to get our timing back under our feet here to avoid that. Was there anything in any of the individual breakout groups that is worth sharing with this whole group? Anyone want to share out a thought that was just being discussed within the breakout groups?
Hey, I've got a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Just in the question, it says, the focus is being on anti-racist. And I think for many people, it's not, they would never think of themselves as racists. And I don't think most people are racist. I think they're biased.
Right.
And I think, and I don't know how, let me know other people who are not people of color. When you see or hear the term not be racist versus confront biases, do they sound the same to you, or do you feel different? Do you think of them as different?
I guess I'll jump in. I think I've had to learn to think of racism as like a belief that you have, not a quality of your being. So if you're looking for instances of racism in your own thinking or in your institution, I think a lot of people who would not obviously consider themselves racist, and maybe that you would not describe as racist, you can still have a particular way of thinking that is impacted by racism, by the society that we've all grown up in. So for me, it's been really important to distinguish, like, I may not think of myself as a racist person, but I did grow up with racist thoughts just floating around me, and obviously I've taken some of them in. And so finding those things that are maybe not in line with the character that I think that I have, and working to get past those and to find them in my institution. But it has definitely, like, I have had to learn to see the word racism as not necessarily something that applies to a person's whole being, just a particular action or a particular thought pattern.
Great. Well, thank you all. We appreciate the conversation. And as I was jumping in and out, there's some incredible dialogue going on amongst that. And I always feel like, unfortunately, this is just a short kind of taster of it. So I apologize that I'm going to have to cut up conversations that are really rich, and I wish we could continue on, and hopefully you will be in your own environment. So one of the things that I do want to talk about a little bit is just kind of the theory of change that we've been using to kind of address what you all were talking about. And one of the things that we've found is that, especially when we look at organizations that are white-led, and a lot of times what we're seeing in our rural areas is that's been the historical model that has been created. One of the things that we hope to do is really push folks to really examine what are the beliefs, what are the op structures, what are the practices that goes on. And so one of the things that we've found is that we've used this, what's on the screen, this theory of change, to really help move people through that process. And so one of the first ones we start with is really around an idea about how do we address people's mindsets. And Jamie, I think that's a little bit what you were addressing as the group we're coming back, is the idea of what are the mindsets that our directors bring to the table. What do our board of directors bring? What does the staff bring to do it? And so one of the first places that we really start is looking at how do we shift those mindsets. Then we move into really looking at what are the structures, and then what are the practices within our organization? And then finally, what are the policies that are in place that are holding some of those practice structures and mindsets in place that we can look to change? And so, as I said, one of the first places that we look at is starting with mindset. So that's our first shift. So Katie, if you want to go ahead and jump to the next one. So in that first shift, we really try to get people to understand their mindsets around identity, privilege, and their relationship to power. And what you'll see there on the left side is one of the things that we've found in our work, especially in rural communities, is that you have to look at what is the right entry point for those people that you're working with. And what we've found is that some of those areas are a little more uncomfortable for individuals than others. And so what we've looked at and had the most success is really starting with those areas of identity markers that people within our group have the least amount of concern in addressing and having those conversations as an entry point. And so one of the things that we find in especially schools is that gender, it's really actually a fairly female-dominated profession, even though leadership is actually the opposite, which it has been male dominated when we look at things like principals, superintendents, and school boards. So we see that. And so one of the things that we found is that it is not the only one, but one of the entry points to start talking about how identity and privilege and how those are related to power can actually play out within our organization. So we look to some of those ones that now every group has their own entry point. Every individual probably has their own entry point. But one of the things that we find is some of those 1, 2, and 3 seem to be in our work a lot easier for board of directors and executive directors to start this conversation with. So looking at things and having conversations around gender and how it relates to privilege and power, economic status and how it relates, age is another one that comes up. Now, what we start to see then, education is another one. When we start getting into sexual identity and ethnicity, that seems to be the area where we start to see a little more area where people need some more time to engage in that process. And so again, when we look at this theory of change and trying to start with changing mindsets, what we found is that the entry points of doing some of these identity markers 1 through 4 are a little bit easier to start the conversation than they are 5 through 6. We know here, those colleagues I've got on the call from Colorado know that sexual identity has been one in our Colorado state standards that's been in the news. It's been part of the revamp of our social studies standards in education and is really playing out. And we're starting to see how that plays out in across the state of Colorado. I know Colorado is not the only one facing it, but I think it's a good example of saying sometimes when working with a board of directors or executive directors in how to tackle and understand this identity, privilege, and relationship to power, sometimes we found that it's easier to start with some areas, get them comfortable with having the dialogue and the journey, and then slowly moving into how does that affect some of these other identity markers like sexual identity, ethnicity, and others to do that. So that's our theory of change that we've continued to work on and look at. As I said, the first one is really about mindsets. The second shift that we really look at is helping people within that mindset to really understand what is the current lived experience of our stakeholders. So who is it that we have that are using our organization, the what we're providing, and then how that can play out in that point is really an important piece to start examining and looking at it. And so one of the things that we do as we try to work with groups in this area is really looking at starting with what is the historical opportunities, but also challenges that the groups that we work with have. And I always like to really focus on opportunities, not just challenges, because a lot of times we've seen that folks will focus on the challenge part of this statement. And we really want to make sure as we're trying to change mindsets and get people to work within the structure is that we're really looking at what opportunities around identity markers there is, as well as what are the challenges. So then one of the things that we do, if you want to go to the next slide, Katie, is we really work with groups to think about once we've really identified those opportunities, we then have to take it to the idea that we say, what are the most pressing concerns within our stakeholder groups that use our organization? And so in this example, we do a lot around youth, family, also community and taxpayers, and then as well as the staff and the leadership of the organization to do that. And so, Katie, I think I stepped on your activity. I apologize.
That's okay, no problem. So I'm gonna put you guys back into breakout groups for about 5 to 7 minutes here. I tried to make them different groups than where you were before, but bear with me if you have some overlap. So you're going to be in that same note catcher, and now you're going to be moving to activity 2. So everybody should be back in the Google Doc for activity 2. And activity 2 is going to ask you to identify some pressing concerns for each of the groups listed here. Those are going to be replicated again for you in the doc, so you don't have to remember what's on this slide. When you go into your breakout groups, make sure you note what group you're assigned to. So you should be able to see you're being moved to group 2, you're being moved to group 4. So make a quick note of that so somebody in your group knows where to put you all in the note catcher. So any questions before I open you out into groups?
I was just real quick before you do that, Katie, I was trying to scan the chat, and Lori from the Colorado State Library System put a comment to clarify what around opportunities. And so one of the things that I would say is that when we look at it, being able to identify opportunities is one. It's important for people to acknowledge what our perspectives are, but then it's also the other part of your statement, which is what the perspective of what the group can offer. And so in this first stage, one of the things that we try to do, Lori, is absolutely bring both of them forward, because they both bring value to the conversation, depending on what entry point the individual is within the group and the biases or the implicit biases that they bring to the table. So it's important to bring all those forward.
Okay, I'll go ahead and open the rooms, and if there's questions, I can float around and answer them. So again, anyone in this main room, if you're not being automatically pushed, you should see an option to join room if you select breakout groups in your kind of settings bar on the bottom of your screen. If you're in the main room, we can also assume that you're either having a bad signal or not participating in conversation is also fine.
Mine says room 5. Should I scoot over to one of the ones for group 4, or I just want to make sure I'm going to the right spot?
No, actually, I think I need to create a new. Nope, your room 5 is correct. I didn't create it in the note catcher. There were more people than I expected, so I need to fix the note catcher really quick. Which
Gotcha. I'll scoot over there. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll go check on group 5 and make sure they understand that.
Okay.
I'm not moving since I'm recording and I'm not sure how that works.
It only records the main room.
But if I move to a breakout room, would it stop the recording? It's fine.
Yes, it would. It
Okay.
would.
Just wanted to double check that anybody in this main room wants to be in a breakout group with or not, if I can troubleshoot that.
That'll be fine.
I see now. Hey, I brought you back, Kirk.
You're on mute, Kirk.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I brought him back here so I could chat with him. So I put it in the chat, Kirk.
Yep. I agree with you.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep. But lots of great conversation going on as I was.
That's awesome.
And
And one thing I did not write down what time I opened these rooms. I think it was about 1:43-ish.
yeah, I'd go ahead and do your
Okay.
1 minute warning.
1 minute warning. Okay, great. I haven't facilitated a group this big on Zoom for a few months. Hopefully it doesn't look like I lost any of my skill. It's just me.
It's looking smooth over here.
Okay, great. Great.
I agree.
Fake it till you make it, right?
I think you're doing great. No faking looking here.
All right, awesome.
Awesome.
And there's great conversation in the chat as well.
I know, thank you, Elsa. That was one thing, as I mentioned, I forgot to, if I'm doing screen share and breakout groups and timing of slides, I struggle with the chat. It's like one too many things. I intended to, there's a function where you can save the chat as like a CSV file or like a .text file, something like that. I can't remember what it is. So I like to save the chat before we close the Zoom so that I can then read through it and following.
Yes, and Chelsea, on your end, same there. It'll save and you can send that too.
Okay, I will do both.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close and that'll give them about 30 seconds to come back. Does that feel
Okay.
right?
Yep.
So folks are gradually coming back from their breakout groups. Thanks to those who have already come back. Thanks for your participation in that. Looks like there's good conversation. They're not coming back fast.
This meeting is being recorded.
Katie, we were just in the thick of things and coming back, and I tell you what, just wonderful conversations. And yeah, Rita, sorry, Rita, you didn't get a chance to finish your statement, but hopefully, and maybe if we go into another breakout room.
Yes, I apologize for the very unsatisfying nature. I think there's a smoother way to do that where I can give people more of a warning. So I apologize for it being so unsatisfying today.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming back. I hope again, as we walk through this process and think about how we're then helping people move on their journey towards DEIA, I think being able to really examine what are the challenges of key constituent groups is a big part. And so I think that the dialogue I jumped into in the different groups I got to visit was incredible dialogue. And the hope would be is that this process would allow you to have that similar conversation within your organization and really bring out where those challenges of their current lived experiences are. What that usually leads us to then is the third shift in our theory of change, which is around how do we eliminate barriers to making sure that we have equitable outcomes. And so that's usually then where we start getting into the nitty-gritty of what's actual operational, what are the structural barriers that are taking place within the library or the school to do that. And so again, unfortunately, due to time, I'm not going to be able to break us into groups and have those conversations, but hopefully you can think about your own organization of what that could look like. But I think a lot of times this is where we start teasing out what are the tangible action plans that we can do for our organization. What is it, in fact, that needs to change? Where are we going to have to put resources? Where are we going to have to put, human capital, professional capital, those kind of things in place to make the kind of changes that really address these barriers that are starting to come out by our organization. And that usually lends to the fourth shift, which is really about policy. And one of the things that I think we found in our work that's the most interesting around is a lot of times as we look at organizations, there's been historical barriers that have been put in place due to the political nature, the bias, whatever got us to the point where your community is, but there actually is some structural things based off of policy that have put in place that need to be removed to do that. But also the other part that we found in our work is that during this shift, one of the things that we want to do is really identify is it a real policy issue or is it a perceived policy issue? Because it's amazing how many times we work with organizations and a particular barrier or issue is brought up. And when the question of, well, why is that happening takes place, sometimes people will say, well, because it is in our handbook, it's in our procedurals, it was passed by the board. But it's amazing how often that's not always true. Sometimes it's a perceived policy that's just been the way we've always done it. And so I'll use an example here in Colorado for our trans students. You know, one of the things that we saw was that there is not a policy that's put out by our Colorado Association of School Boards that doesn't allow, doesn't require gender-specific restrooms. And so when some schools were tackling what were they doing around the restroom, around their students, their trans students, one of the things that those schools ran into was that our policy said, well, when we actually dove into find me the policy, the law, the whatever it is, one of the things that we found is it was an example of a perceived community policy, not necessarily a written one. So it was one that then we were able to work with some organizations to really say, how do we break down and what is an organization going to do with that? So in looking at what are the policies, one of the things that we want to make sure is that we're real clear on what our written policies are versus what our perceived policies are around the areas of challenges that we're identifying through this process. And I think a lot in the area of DEIA, one of the things that we find is that a lot of times they are perceived policies, not necessarily written policies. And so that's really helpful in an organization as a leader to be able then to identify if they're perceived versus written, what are the appropriate next steps? If it's perceived, it may be about changing mindsets. It may be about engaging the community. There's lots of different ways to approach it. If it's actually written, the question would be whether it was written by us as an organization or was it written by state statute. And of course, in both of those examples, there would be different roads that you'd want to travel as you go down to that. So that's always a key for us, is whether or not it's written or an official policy, or if it's around a perceived in that area of mindset and those kind of ways. So Katie, if you want to jump to 23. Real quick. So again, one of the things that we hope is that we put forward to you a theory of change to think about as you as in your organization are trying to go forward and make changes around the idea of how to have impact in the area of DEIA. We highly encourage you to think about this framework to do it. If you need help or support, we're more than happy to do that. But one of the things we'd like to do is before we wrap it up, we'll just take 30 seconds. Would love to hear some feedback from anyone. Please go ahead and take yourself on mute around how do you see this theory of change playing out in your organization? Does it resonate with you? Or do you see some challenges for your circumstances that you feel like this theory of change doesn't necessarily fit? Would love to hear a couple people come off mute and let us know your thoughts.
I think there's real value in breaking down the activity we just did with the those stakeholders and what their biggest challenges are, their biggest concerns are. When we really look at what those are, we can see that they're not necessarily in opposition to one another the way we might have thought they were.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
I think that's a really powerful insight. I was actually having a discussion with my director, I think just yesterday, about how a lot of people, when you take some of the flare words out that cause like instant emotional reactions, we agree on a lot more than we disagree about. And sometimes being able to identify those same things that we all care about and just bring those forward as the true issue that we're talking about can help bridge connections that we may have otherwise missed.
Kurt, you also have a question in the chat about having a resource that might lift up the best practices for policy creation.
Okay, great. Thank you. Awesome. Well, I wanted to let you know that we do have a link that has resources and our contact information there. Oh,
Yep.
okay, you gonna throw it in the chat for
Yep.
us?
Sorry. It's on the, I just wanted to call out that it's on the bottom of the same document. So if you just keep scrolling down, and if we don't have an answer to the question that was just put in the chat, Kirk and I can do some research around it and add a link in the chat here to make sure all those get answered. So lots of resources here, as well as our contact information. If there's any follow-up or any organizations that you think would benefit from the 4-part training. And Regina, I know we're late passing it back to you. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. No, this is great and very rich. And, you know, again, thank you again for a very rich conversation. And starting the conversation is really important. And so maybe we can continue the conversation in some other way moving forward. Because of time, I really wanted to actually get out an announcement that it was sent out about some of the grant opportunities. And let me go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully you'll be able to see that. And one of which, before I talk about the grant opportunities, is that Rural Library Network Conversations for Action will have webinars on the first Wednesday of the month. And the next one is actually going to be continuing the conversations about affiliate groups that we started in December during the E-Summit. And so we'll be breaking out in different groups to have those kind of conversations about family engagement, equity, advocacy, health integration, and so forth. We also have a Partners for Rural Impact Rural Summit coming up April the 3rd through the 4th in Charlotte, North Carolina. Please look at the link here and feel free to ask questions later on. The American Library Association has a Libraries Transforming Communities grant that's up and that's due February the 28th. We also have the American Library Association book list publication, and that will also have a grant opportunity that's due February the 28th. Please go to that American Library Association site to get further information. And then also the American Heart Association is providing a grant up to $10,000 that will provide mini grants of $1,500 to $2,000. And I'm going to drop in the chat the actual brief survey to actually initiate your proposal. It's very simple. And also you see Tim Nikolai, who is actually the contact person to ask any further questions. Would like to have you be a member of the network to be eligible, and then also a public library. Now you can work in collaboration with another organization, but you want to be a network member, and then also you want to also be a public library as well in rural areas. With that being said, that concludes today's webinar. What a wonderful webinar to get us started for this year. And thank you so much, Kurt and Katie, for a rich conversation on DEIA. We look forward to having other conversations. You all take care, and we'll hope to see you soon. Take care. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.